So, Beans, directed by Tracy Deer, about a young Mohawk girl going through the Oka crisis. A lot of insane topics discussed in this movie, like racism against Indigenous people, mental health, growing up, coming of age, all that things, navigating as an Indigenous person in a white-centric world. And through all of this, I feel like I picked up on something that was a little bit lacking, but I think it speaks volumes, which is ironic because I'm going to be talking about the impact of silence in Indigenous medias. So the lacking of music and really focusing on just the ambiance of the situation, breaking glass when they're fleeing the reserve, footsteps, the faint TV at April's house when she was first meeting her, things like that in every single scene where it's just silent. I think it's very deliberate. It's meant to make the viewer feel immersed in the situation and make the situation feel more real, because it is real. It shouldn't be something that's dramatized for entertainment, as so many Indigenous stories already are. It's a real thing that happened to real people and is still happening to real people. And I think the silence is meant to amplify that feeling, to put the viewer in the character's shoes and make them understand what the characters are going through. Even when music is used, it's used as integrated as possible through the radio, through headphones, just like you and I. It brings me to emotional silence, which is very prevalent in Indigenous histories as a result of settler colonizers, breaking the system against them. But it's a very prevalent thing because silence and not speaking out about your trauma leads to generational trauma, because you have no outlet for what you went through, and so you can't help but kind of relay it on to other people. Or, as we saw in the movie, April's dad was an alcoholic. He can't help but find solace in alcohol, and so in turn it's hurting his family. And then we find later that April has suffered sexual abuse at his hands, but she doesn't want to talk about it. It's that silence that hurts so many Indigenous families and has hurt so many Indigenous ancestries through so many years. And I think Beans does talk about that. The movie Beans does discuss that and what can happen if these people don't find the help that they need because they're too afraid to speak up. And the last thing I want to talk about is the silence regarding Indigenous representation. This really can go for any minority, but Indigenous people especially, since they've been misrepresented so much. In Alicia Elliott's On Seeing and Being Seen, page 23, she says, "It was the first time I, an Indigenous woman, had read the work of another Indigenous woman. It was such an intimate and personally revelatory moment, as if she had reached out from the pages, lifted my face and smiled. She can see me, I thought. She can see me. I was 25 years old." And this essay talks about how there's a lack of Indigenous representation in media. 25 years old, she had to wait for a representation that really reflects herself, which is crazy. And that's another reason why I think Beans is such an important movie, because not only does it look at a real historical event that impacted so many Indigenous people, but it looks at it through the lens of a teenage girl, or a pre-teenage girl. Yeah. Teka and Dakwa goes through things that every single teenage girl goes through, like trying to find yourself, growing up, peer pressure, trying to fit in with the cool kids. And I think it does such a good job at saying, hey, this is you. It's a mirror story for all of those girls going through all of that, the peer pressure, the social anxiety, and also the Indigenous problems that come with racism and systemic issues. And I think that's really cool. It's really good. It breaks the silence of bad representation, misrepresentation, or just lack of representation. So what did we learn through this probably very long and also very on time, very not late, very absolutely not late, very on time assignment? We learned that silence can be seen as so many different things. Emotional silence that perpetuates generational trauma, silence that Indigenous people have to kind of like swallow as to not subjugate the stereotypes that are held against them by settler colonizers, that they have to deal with they have to deal with the racism against them, but they can't speak out against the racism against them because of the whatever. And the silence that is the lack of representation of Indigenous people. And then there's the silence that makes Indigenous stories real and true and makes people empathize with it. So silence can be useful in a lot of ways, and I think it's very, very clever how quiet and somber this movie was, despite dealing with so many heavy, heavy topics. Thanks for showing us this movie, and I think you should go watch it. This is when it wasn't late.